My first question for you today is, if the UN were to be reimagined by the youth, what exactly do you think would remain and what would need to radically change in order to accommodate how the youth thinks? And if so, do you think it would be feasible? Would it be effective?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to discuss this with you today. But I guess I'm like the worst person to ask that question because I'm an old person now. But what I could say is that, the UN is also an old organization. Yeah, in many ways, it was born out of crisis of the Second World War, and we're now this year celebrating 80 years of the United Nations and 70 years of Sri Lanka being a member of the United Nations. And, after 80 years, the world has changed. Not only are the kind of problems that we're facing fundamentally different in scale and nature, just think about climate change or pandemics. Yeah. When the UN was created, we didn't think about this, but also conflicts. Yeah. Conflicts are pretty different as well. Yeah. And I guess the issue here is that it's a big question mark. It's clear that the UN today, the structure of the UN, the way it functions, is no longer adapted to the kind of challenges that we are facing. And so the question is, what is the response? How is the UN going to change? And in great part, it's for your generation to find the solutions and the ideas. And I hope that at the Model UN, you can have part of your conversation fleshing out what you think should be the kind of UN that you're looking for. But what I could say is that, the type of organization, just from very basic things as the way the UN, the UN remains the values of the UN of peace, of preventing war and conflict between nations, the goals of human dignity, of human rights for all. I think that hasn't changed, but how we get there is what has changed. And so clearly everything from the way the UN meets, yeah, we still kind of meet like if it was 1950. Yeah, we go to a big hall and and everybody does one speech after another, and you wonder, well, there's the internet, and maybe you could be sharing the statements in advance, and let's spend the time that we're together to actually tackle some of the things that we disagree with. Yeah, so I think that, for example, is one way, but also, with technology, there's a lot that the UN can do very differently. Yeah. So I think that's one thing. The other is that the way the UN has evolved its structure, it's many UN agencies, the different divisions and groups within the secretariat or across the organization. They were built for a world where perhaps things were thought of very differently. But, today, I don't know, medicine and health is intimately linked with politics. It's intimately linked with the climate. So, problems are much more integrated. So in many ways, having an organization like, WHO for health, another organization for young people, UNFPA, another for development, and it is very fragmented. And so I think there's a big push at finding ways of integrating this and making the organization more nimble. But at the end of the day, the United Nations is a political organization. So it's about power. And I think one of the most important things about the United Nations is that it gives one vote, one country at the General Assembly, not at the Security Council, but at the General Assembly. And that means that every country is important. Small country, big country, powerful country, yes, less powerful country. They all have a voice. And I think that's something that your generation, you need to preserve, because that, I think, is a fundamental value of the United Nations. Yeah, and so at a time where today we see a lot of um, erosion of the international rule-based order, where we see powerful countries using their power beyond the rules that were agreed. I think this is time for this generation to protect that, to say we care about rules. We care about a world that is governed by rules, because that protects, in particular, smaller countries like Sri Lanka.
Like you mentioned, the UN is fragmented, just like the world is. The world goes through a lot today. We went through a pandemic, there's several crises, wars going across the world. You obviously yourself have a lot of experience within the United Nations.
Mhm.
What's one moment in your career that sort of shaped your view on humanity and gave you hope almost in the youth, even when the conversation felt a bit stagnant or dormant?
It's a beautiful question, very complicated. I mean, there's so many times in my work that I've seen, I don't know if it's about youth, but about humanity. And I think anybody who, I've been in very difficult circumstances after the earthquake in Haiti, for example, where I saw people that had lost everything. And the first reaction they had was to help others and to help their neighbors and to help their community. Um, I work with paramilitary fighters and guerrilla fighters in Colombia, who's even within families had fought and killed each other for many years. Uh, Go through a process of truth and of apology and rebuilding their lives and their communities together. I've worked in Pakistan, where after many years, we managed bringing together society to do a constitutional reform that included the tribal areas inside the country. Despite huge history and interests, and so I think there's so many examples of things that we felt impossible, and that because I think at the end, people are human. People, we're all very similar. We care about very similar things. We care about our health. We care about our family. We care about our kids. We care about prosperity for us and our communities. I think it gives me great hope. When people think about the wars today in Sudan, in Gaza, in Yemen, and look at it in a way that they think this is impossible to resolve. It will never be resolved. Well, probably this is what we said of the war in Guatemala, in Colombia. It's what we said of the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And so, wars do end, and people do come together, even when, they fought each other for a long time. So it gives me a lot of hope. And I think that's also why I stay at the United Nations despite all the difficulties. And this is why I'm so proud of working for the United Nations.
What were the specific examples that added value to your career and changed your perspective about global issues?
Well, I joined when I was very young, and so and I joined as a volunteer to the UN. So I was first a volunteer for almost a year before I continued as a consultant, something like this. And I mean, I think there's a few things that that made me stay, I guess, is yes, or that got me enthusiastic and engaged in the United Nations. I think, first of all, which is, it's kind of a little selfish, but you grow up thinking, like you're very privileged. You went to school and you had the opportunity to have an education, and you joined an organization that is devoted to helping others. And you go and you think that by joining the United Nations, you're going to help others. But at the end, especially in my first years, I think I realized that actually it was the others who were helping me, who were educating me, because there was not much I was bringing apart from a bit of enthusiasm and energy. I didn't have much to offer, and I think that's I think it goes to the core that helping other people and being able to improve the lives of other people is a very complex endeavor, very difficult, and you need to be very humble because it is complicated, because there's a lot of power structures, there's a lot of obstacles. And being humble means you need to learn a lot. You need to invest a lot in yourself. You need to learn a lot before you're able to help another. You need to be able to understand somebody and his life and the obstacles. And you need to understand a country, and you need to understand a community before you're able to help them. And this is true for a country, but it's also true inside a country. Yeah. And so I think that's a first thing to say. The second is that I think it's also about putting yourself out there in places that are difficult, challenging, physically, but also intellectually. Get yourself out of your comfort zone, because that's the only way that you learn. That's the only way you're able to learn and be able to contribute something useful to others. So I think that's very, very important. Yeah.
Is it important for aspiring professionals to learn about international relations or do social sciences in order to get into the UN system itself, or is there any other fields of study that they could do in order to get into the UN system?
Well, the UN is very big. It's getting smaller these days because we're suffering a lot from financial pressures and member states. But I don't think there is a profession in particular. I think, of course, social science a little bit more, but there's a lot of doctors, there's a lot of professions, logistics and procurement and operations and marketing and communications. So I don't think there is a specific. I think what is more important is languages. Yeah, very important. You need to connect with others, and learning as many languages as possible is so important, because there's no other. The best way to connect with somebody else is to be able to speak his or her language. So languages is very important, and also I guess what you call in Sri Lanka soft skills. So I think that's more important than knowledge, especially now that knowledge, you can get it out of a computer, but no computer or AI is going to show you how to manage conflicts. Yeah. How do you manage when people hate each other and are yelling at each other? How do you contribute to resolve that? How do you organize deadlines? And how do you organize when there's multiple priorities? Organize yourself. How do you ask for help? Can't manage. It's very, very hard to learn how to ask for help. How do you stay sane in difficult situations? How do you care for yourself to be able to help for others? Just to give you a few examples. So all those things are very important. And the last thing to say is that obviously you will probably be much more informed of this with AI and new technologies. Also, the kind of professions that we are going to hire is going to be different. Yeah, we're going to need AI ethicists, and we're going to need people who understand new technologies. And so, I think this is partly the challenge of the next few years, is to finding people who know about these professions, and maybe we'll recruit younger and younger. So maybe I'll be exiting quicker than planned. Yeah.
With misinformation and hate speech rising online, how can the UN support youth media literacy while also defending the freedom of expressions?
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a relevant subject for Sri Lanka. The truth is that it's now a relevant subject everywhere. And the Secretary General has launch a big campaign against hate speech and misinformation. And it's a very important priority for the UN because it cuts across every issue: health and education and politics and elections, and violence against women. And, because of the way and the space and the importance that virtual spaces take now in our lives. So we've been working quite a bit here in Sri Lanka on hate speech, and there are some good news. Let's say when we look at global trends in Sri Lanka, or sort of overall trends in Sri Lanka, we see that gradually in the last few years, there's been a reduction of hate speech related to ethnicity and religion, in part because political parties have been using less religion and ethnicity as a political tool. And a good example is the incumbent government right now during the last parliamentary elections. We've seen very, very low levels of hate speech related to ethnicity and religion compared to the last parliamentary election. So it depends a lot of the incumbent party often, and it depends a lot of political parties. And certainly the NPP here has used less ethnicity and religion as a political tool to divide people, scare tactics, and So I think that's fantastic. That's really impressive, especially a country like Sri Lanka, where for so many years ethnicity and religion has been used to divide. And so I've been very impressed with some of the speeches of the president in that direction. He's been very articulate, in outlining that why this is so bad, but also how him and his government won't use ethnicity. So that's good, and we see this. This hasn't disappeared, and in particular, the Muslim community has been particularly targeted recently. So that remains an issue of concern. But more importantly, we've seen a very worrying trend of online harassment, online violence directed at women, intimate partner violence, but also a lot of hate speech, a lot of disinformation around women politicians, women leaders, women who speak up. And what I find more worrying is that often that hate speech and disinformation comes from parliamentarians themselves, from politicians themselves. So we have a real problem in that direction. And so the problem with this is that, the previous government has tried to do a law for that, the Online Safety Act, completely useless law. But it's very hard to legislate to this. It has a lot to do with people's responsibility, education. So there's a number of things that we as the UN here in Sri Lanka are doing. We've been working, on the one hand, we've been doing kind of a public campaign. Well, first, we're investing in understanding it. So data and monitoring, and we formed a community of practice of civil society and experts who know a lot about it and exchange. So we're formed for exchange. And second, we have invested in a campaign, a public campaign, to try to sensitize on the negative effects of hate speech and disinformation. And third, we're working with schools to, again, work with people your age about, the negative effects of, posting something about a classmate, about his or her look, and how that can have detrimental effects on that person. And, I don't need to tell you, God knows what's going on in your schools about this. I'm sure you have 1,000 examples. And I don't know, you saw this last year when there was these cases of suicide of young people. There's a lot of conversation about the role that bullying and, online bullying played in mental illness that was linked to suicide. So it's very severe situation. So, and finally, we're trying to work a lot with the media, political parties, media, and And we certainly would like to do a lot more, especially around times like elections, but we haven't done yet. But working with the media, I think, is very important.
As you mentioned earlier in a previous question, that the youth involvement is really important and that the United Nations is so focused about youth. How does the UN implement youth insights in their projects and function? We would like to hear some insights from you on that question, sir.
That's great. I mean, I think in part, I don't think we do enough. So I think that's the first thing to say is that, we don't do as much as we should. And, Sri Lanka is it's a very big challenge because the population is getting older. Sri Lanka is an old country. It's getting old. Yeah, population is getting old, and people are not making enough children. So we need your generation to make a lot more children, by the way. Yes, you don't need to think about that now. Don't have them now, but you need to have a lot more children. Yeah, and this is the challenge for many countries in Asia and Pacific. Yeah. But and the problem with this is that, as societies get older, politicians who need the votes of citizens tend to respond to the needs of those who vote for them, and thus tend to take decisions and policies and budget and resources go to the older part of population. Yeah. So this means that, very often the voices of young people, the needs of young people are kind of set aside. So I think for us at the UN, it's part of our job to engage more systematically with young people, to make sure that when, for example, we're supporting the government in developing a new fisheries act, that we're making sure that we're not only speaking to the current fishermen, but also to the next generation, yes, of fishermen around the country, to see what are the specific needs of the next generation. Yeah. So I think that's one thing. Second, we've created last year a new youth advisory council. So this is a small group of young people that are here to advise us about things we can do differently. Yeah. So we've been doing that. And on top of it, we're trying as well to do a lot more, for example, in hiring young people. We have a pretty robust now youth, UNV program, which is one of the great ways. I came into the UN in that way, but it's one of the ways that young people can start at the UN. But at the same time, I think it's more of across all the work that we do, I think we need to do a lot better in kind of making sure we think about it and we include young people. Yeah.